Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome from and to a sunny Bournemouth. I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody has got through their week okay hitherto. I thought I would take the opportunity, as the weather is glorious today, to have a little walk and a talk, because there are a couple of things on my mind. Now, that's not to guarantee that I'll remember them when I get around to talking about them, but that was the impulse that made me press record and just basically kind of share a few thoughts, really, more than anything else. Okay, so I've just walked through a little side street in Boscombe and I've come out at a road called Boscombe Overcliff Drive. I'm going to cross the road here in a second, although you should never cross the road on a bend. And then we'll go to the other side of the road, and then there will be a view that I'm sure you will join me in agreeing is rather spectacular. So let's have a look. So, while we walk down here, I hope you liked the last video I put out. The video is courtesy of John Thor, so John, if you happen to be listening to this at a later time or whatever, thank you very much for letting me use that to put out. The title I gave my own, which was the only thing that's been to space is your imagination. And the key word in that is imagination, and we'll get to that in a second. But here is the view once you come over onto the top of the cliff. This is the cliff that I was talking about, that's only a few hundred yards away from one of those many buildings and network of churches throughout Boscombe that were built in a time that would have been impossible, because we simply wouldn't have had the technology, and B, well, sourcing the material would have been impossible, never mind all the transport networks and logistical networks that would have needed to have been in place to have that happen. But anyway, here is a gorgeous view of the top of one of those cliffs, and over to the distance. You won't be able to see it on here because it is not a amazingly clear day. I can't see the Isle of Wight today. Normally I can. Over to the left there, you can barely make out the cliffs there. Well, normally to the right of those cliffs you can see needles and stuff. Of course, they are a good portion of miles away from here. Shouldn't be visible in their entirety at all. And as you look across the horizon over to our right, a beautiful sunspot there, a hot spot created by our not distant sun. And behind those trees, in that distance, in that direction I should say, is Bournemouth town, and then behind now there's another bay and there is Poole. But it's a magnificent day, and yeah, and they are the sort of days that you long for when you're living in an area like this. Of course, you don't live on a beach, but it's nice to have it nearby to clear the mind, have a bit of a think, reflect, ponder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let this camera roll, and I'm going to just take you with me, and we're going to go for a little walk and a talk. So getting back to what I was saying about the last video that I filmed, or that I didn't film, that I put out, I should say, not filmed. Yeah, I got courtesy of John Thor. Check his channel out. He's well worth checking out. He always puts out some really fascinating, thought-provoking and irrefutable information for any doubters amongst you regarding the shape of the earth and whatnot. But the imagination bit in that title, long-winded tangent there, is key, because that is exactly what is being preyed upon and controlled. You know, imagination, perception, that sort of thing, fantasy if you like, whilst you know, whilst all these various things are going on and put out through the media. So a very good example of that would be, well, all the distraction that's going on at the moment. So whether you have a sponsored event that's, let's say, in a renowned geographical part of the world that always has problems, so you're feeding that narrative, or whether you have a high profile court case that's televised globally with a small g, that fits that narrative, and while you're at it you can throw in a Queen's Jubilee for good measure, or you can even throw in an anniversary of a war that happened 40 years ago, which is what we're doing right now in the UK. So all these distraction tactics that play into people's imaginations, you know, and they work a treat. They really do work a treat. It's quite funny because I looked at what's happened now in the last few years, and I go back to, let's say, the 80s when I was approaching my teens, and it was a similar kind of, how can I put it, timeline, order of events. You could have easily copy pasted it for now and put it in 2022. So I'll give an example. We had in quick succession the so-called AIDS virus. Then not long after that, while all that was going on and all the paranoia was being created through misinformation, etc., those who know, while that was going on, then we also got introduced to things like race riots. LA rings a bell, early 90s for example. So then you had the HIV/AIDS, the race riots thing going down, and then of course you also had the Gulf War of 1991, which occupied many people because that was the media's moment of glory in terms of watching a bit of war on your television while chomping at your popcorn. So as you can see, and that's just off the top of my head, I haven't done some massive research on that, and I'm not particularly clever. It's just things that I remember from when I was younger, and if people take a think back to when they were, then there might seem some similarities in terms of narratives that are rearing their heads now. Things like the O.J. Simpson trial. Well, we have a trial right now that seems to be occupying a lot of people's minds. You know, all these things that have been played out before, since the media took control of people's perceptions in the 60s, the 1960s that is, not the 1860s where they were building massive big brick buildings before they could even manufacture the amount of bricks required. Again, a tangent. So yeah, so we notice a lot of similarities with what's gone on beforehand. You know, we hear all these old sayings, you know, history repeats itself. Well, people don't understand how truthful those sayings are. No one really pays attention to them because, yeah, history does always repeat itself. You know, but I mean, just admiring that view out there. Bet that stretch of water could tell a story. So yeah, so when we talk about the 80s and all that, it is the 40th anniversary, I do believe, of the Falklands War, a place that I'd never heard of until it popped up on the BBC News one day when the Brits started getting involved back in 1981-82, just around about the time that Charles and Diana got married, and we got the day off school but still had to go to school to watch the TV and enjoy the event. Yeah, that was happening in the early 80s, the Falklands War 40 years ago, and it's quite interesting because if you change the model of the Earth's map and look at it on a different kind of map, you'll notice that the Falkland Islands are perfectly strategically placed near one of the three, what they call South Poles, that we're told we have, because of course you have 3 poles, don't you, in the South Pole. That would make total sense. But anyway, yeah, go check it out. If you look at the AE map, for example, the azimuthal equidistant map, you'll see that where the 3 South Poles are, they are also quite close by. The closest territory would be in, let's say, British / whatever the powers that be hands, right? And of course, if you go a bit further than that, you start hitting the 60th degree parallel, and of course you can't go beyond that unless you have to adhere to some absolutely ludicrous rules and regulations and spend a load of money, and also yeah, you just wouldn't get very far. You can look that up as well. It's all under the guidelines of the Antarctic Treaty System, the longest existing treaty ever, never been broken. All countries are at one when it comes to not going to the South Pole. Interesting, isn't it? Of course there isn't a South Pole, but anyway, that's another story. Yes, so the Falkland Islands, that happened in 1982, and that was of course back in the day when it happened, a different storyline for me, because I was being brought, I was growing up in the army. My dad was in the British Army at the time, and of course we had neighbours who went out there because their regiments were called upon, because of their expertise or whatever was needed, right? And my dad very nearly went out, but his regiment actually didn't get called out. The war then stopped in time, as it were. But it's quite interesting that they're making a big song and dance of that, and of course coupling that up with the 70 years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign in the UK. So she's kind of chief subject below the Masonic power brokers, I guess. So a little badge that you'll find within the badge of police and the fire services and the military. They all serve our monarchy. People shouldn't forget that. And so just by default, by serving the monarchy, you're serving the same people that the monarchy are serving. Anyway, yeah, so they're talking a lot about the Falkland Islands and the Queen and this, that and the other. So again, it's that distraction thing that I was telling you about, and the Brits love a good old traditional bash, don't they? They love to get the flags out and remember all our yesterdays and when we were great and when we had an empire and all that nonsense. So people still buy into all of that. They really, really do. It's quite unfortunate, really. I'm just trying to get a nice view here. The sun is speeding away from us at quite a rate of knots. It is not setting. Yes, and while we're on that topic, quite interestingly enough, I noticed, and I'm sure some of you also, any of you who keep an eye on mainstream, like I do, will notice that Finland and Sweden have applied to join NATO. And I have to laugh. I really do have to laugh, because of course, NATO, no NATO, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But again, it's keeping that you know, the banging of the drums going, isn't it? Oh look, we've got freedom-loving countries like Sweden and Finland now wanting to join NATO. They feel so threatened by Russia. Well, Russia's been next to Finland for as far as I can remember. Surely they would have waltzed on through there now if they wanted to. But anyway, yeah, so they want to join NATO. Allegedly, they've been trying for 30 years to join NATO. So they might want to add a couple of zeros to their end of the contract, maybe. Don't know, or am I being cynical? Anyway, yeah. Oh, and on top of that, I came across some British Forces news, and interestingly enough, that at this very moment in time, there is a major NATO exercise going on in Poland. Now, in years gone by, I remember in the 80s, for example, when it was the height of the not so cold war, and not so hot war either, all the training manoeuvres for tanks anyway were done either in Germany or they were done in Canada, if they were testing dry climates and prairie conditions and that sort of stuff, right? So in those days they did a lot of their exercises in the woodlands of Germany, but of course now they go across the border and go to Poland because it's cheaper, because the wall is down and you can travel around that part of Europe now without any constraints. I mean, who's going to stop a military with tens of thousands of men and equipment and women, of course? Anyway, no one really, are they? But anyway, that's going on right now. So there's some saber rattling there, you know, all this little talk about, well, what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. They do exercises every few years. They have to. And so what they'll do is sometimes the Americans will assume command of a NATO exercise, sometimes it will be the Brits, depends. And then sometimes the Brits will play the bad guys, whoever the bad guys are. It could be the Chinese, could be the Russians. I don't believe Arabian terrorists have tanks. And they'll flip that role round as well. And that's what they do. So it is nothing to do with an ensuing invasion of Russia. It is a regular thing that happens throughout Western Europe on a 2 or 3 year basis. They have these large NATO exercises, and I do believe about 75 odd Challenger battle tanks are taking part. And that's just from Britain. And NATO, of course, is a large alliance. So you can imagine the scale of that exercise. Quite big. Yeah. So those were the sort of things I was picking up. So there was a lot of military / tradition kind of things being announced here, there and everywhere here in the UK, if you paid a bit of attention to it. Which I found quite interesting, because again, that's the sort of narrative that fits the Brits. It might not work in Germany because they've distanced themselves from their military history because of, well, the role they've been pushed into as bad guys from World War II. So anything military or anything traditional was not cool in Germany, certainly when I was growing up and living over there. That's changing a bit now. See, it only takes a generation or two, doesn't it? And that could take me off to another big tangent, but I won't bother. But there we go. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, really. It was something that's, kind of is what they're after, isn't it? Our perspectives, our perception, our imagination, our fantasy, our thoughts, our time, our energy, our spirit. Pretty much everything. Anyway, I don't know if you can hear the wind across the 70 years. I don't know who the longest serving reigning monarch was before that. Would it be Victoria, I would imagine, was it? Or is Victoria still the longest reigning monarch? I'm not too sure. I don't know my kings and queens. I wouldn't know. I'd have to have someone let me know on that. Of course, I'm not too sure I believe in all the kings and queens timeline, because I've kind of changed my mind on all of that, and I kind of see it a little bit differently now. I don't think our history as a civilization even goes very far back at all. I think it just about predates Industrial Revolution. So I would say 70s, 90s, 1800s, and I think that's when it all happens. But that's a topic I want to get into in much more depth at a later stage, but that will require a lot of research and doing some parallel timelines and seeing where that all fits in. But that's something I'm definitely going to look at closely, because if that's the case, then it pretty much nullifies any history books that are supposed to predate that time. Any at all. And that in itself is absolutely mind-blowing. But there we go. I hope I've not rambled on or waffled on too much. I just felt like getting the camera out and just having a little chat. And yeah, just sharing some thoughts with you, really. I don't have the answers to any of it. I have my own opinions on it based on what I kind of have learned through the years and what I see myself and observe myself. But you know, don't fall for those illusions. It is a jungle out there, it really is, and you have to be careful. These distractions are everywhere, and like a wise man once said to me, it's not the elephant in the room that will get you, it's the ants, always. Anyhow, okay, on this note, I hope you end the week well, all of yous. I hope you enjoy your upcoming weekend. I hope everybody's kind to each other, remains healthy, safe and sane, most importantly. And I will put a video out soon probably to do with our hidden history and stuff, because the Where It's At channel at the moment is put on ice at the, for now, because there are too many things happening at the moment. I've got quite a few things going on in my life at the moment, as has Ellie. So it's literally a time thing. It's not to do with any lack of interest or motivation. You can only be at one place at a time, and when you are, then you want to give 100% and not be spinning too many plates. So you know, we will get that up and running again soon. It's not forgotten about. But in the meantime, yeah, watch out for some videos that I'll be putting out here or there. I'll probably put another one or two of those out, something I like to call them sort of info videos from other content creators, to, you know, give you plenty of nourishment for thought. Because at the end of the day, if you've been lied to about this, then you've been lied to about everything. So on that note, I wish you all farewell. See you all soon. Some of you sooner. Ta-ta for now. Bye-bye.